Welcome to the 255th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with Anna Solomon, author of The Little Bride and Leaving Lucy Pear. Just a note, this interview was originally recorded when Leaving Lucy Pear was published. Stay tuned for my interview with Anna Solomon. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Anna Solomon, author of Leaving Lucy Pear. Anna, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, can you read 2 or 3 pages from your new novel, Leaving Lucy Pear?
Sure. Here's the beginning. This is part 1, first chapters in 1917. If they were coming, this was the night. The pears had stayed yellow and hard for so long that Bee had started to despair, but they were finally ready to pick. The moon was a quarter full. The afternoon's wind had gone limp. Midnight came and went. Bee counted to 500 for extra measure, silently, so she wouldn't wake the nurse. Then she took up the infant from its bassinet, wrapped it in her Aunt Vera's Angora shawl, and crept down the cellar stairs in her bare feet. The stairs to the cellar were granite and cold. The original wooden ones had burned with the original wooden house in 1873. Bee did not know about the fire, but she could smell it, because the cellar was the one part of the house that hadn't needed rebuilding, and its walls retained the flavor of ash. She moved toward the bulkhead door as fast as she could, feeling along the wall with her free hand, careful not to bump the handles of shovels and hoes, though the shovels and hoes had been through far worse. They had witnessed flood and fire. They had been variously cared for and abused by generations of gardeners, had been used to plant tulips and to dig graves. They had even, once upon a time, been in the presence of another unwed mother and her infant. Knowing this might have put Bee's own suffering in perspective, but she did not know, and she had not been taught perspective. She was 18, the daughter of ascendant Boston Jews who had sent her away to Eastern Point in a black curtained limousine the day she started to show. The bulkhead door was heavier than she expected, its diagonal slope demanding that it be lifted as much as pushed. She'd unlocked it from the outside before going to bed, but she hadn't tested its weight, and now the thing didn't budge. She pressed harder. The cellar was her only way out. She had tested the doors on the first floor, and every one either shrieked or squeaked or groaned. She pushed again. If she put the baby down, it would cry. Bee started to pant with panic. The cellar roof seemed to be dropping, the walls squeezing. She climbed the bulkhead steps until she was bent nearly in two, the infant squeezed into the small space between her thighs and chest, and tried to open the door with her back. Her legs shook. Sweat sprang at her neck. She was still soft and weak from the birth 2 weeks before, her right eye bloodshot, though she had no memory of pushing, no memory of any of it, nothing, until a baby was being handed to her, clean and silent, like a doll her mother had bought. She was lucky, Bee understood. Aunt Vera had hired a doctor who had studied in Germany with the father of twilight sleep. There had been morphine, there had been scopolamine. These, according to Aunt Vera, would do more to liberate women than the vote. Bee understood that she was supposed to understand herself to be lucky. She understood that she must have pushed and that she should be glad not to remember. She pushed now, using her neck, her shoulders, every muscle in her body. At last the door gave an inch, then 2, then lightened so quickly Bee was following it. She had to scramble to catch up before it slammed on the ground outside. She looked behind her, above. The hinge had given a sharp cry. She went stiff, waiting for another sound, the nurse's heavy footsteps, her heavy call. Beatrice? She waited until her breath came and quieted her heart. Then she stepped out into the night. I'll stop there.
Great. Well, if someone listening hasn't heard about Leaving Lucy Pear yet, how would you describe your new novel?
It's a book about 2 women, one of whom abandons her baby, which is the scene that I'm reading from now that you were hearing, in 1917, and the other who raises that baby. And we meet them both again in 1927, which is when the entire book, except for this first chapter, takes place. And the baby herself is by then 10 years old. Her name is Lucy Pear. And it's really a book about how this both abandonment and raising another person's child has shaped both of these women's lives, and then the lives of a kind of larger community of characters who are also featured in the book and whose points of view we see, and the way in which this one summer in 1927 they are brought back together.
So do you remember the original idea or impetus that led you to writing Leaving Lucy Pear?
Yeah, there were sort of two things. One was I came across in this book of history about Cape Ann, which is where the book takes place and where I grew up, Cape Ann, Massachusetts. It's sort of north of Boston. You could call it the other Cape. It's the north, it's a much smaller Cape than Cape Cod, but it's north up there. And I was reading this book of history and came across this anecdote about this woman, this wealthy Bostonian who had been summering in Gloucester. That Gloucester is on Cape Ann, summering in Gloucester and suffering from a, quote, nervous disorder. And the nervous disorder was being aggravated by this whistle buoy, which had been put offshore. These whistle buoys were, like most buoys, they meant to protect sailors and fishermen from crashing into shore in the night or in fog. And she had asked, of course, she had these connections with the Navy, and she'd asked them if they could have the whistle buoy taken out, and they did. And then this thing went on to report that the following summer she was feeling much better. Her nervous disorder she'd gotten married and wasn't having this nervous disorder anymore, and had said that the whistle buoy could be put back in the water. And a lot compelled me about this kind of about what I read there. The nervous disorder itself, the fact that the marriage seemed to have cured it. And then really this whistle buoy and the question on a plot level as a novelist of, what would have happened if during the time the whistle buoy was out, there had been a consequence, one that this woman would then have been responsible for. So that sort of got my wheels turning. And it kind of met up somehow with this mystery that I had been in my family since I was a kid. We did have these pear trees near our house that every year at the same time, right when they were about to be ripe, all the pears would disappear one night. And there was that mystery had kind of stayed with me, and this question of who was taking them. And so that came together. I can't explain exactly how with the question of the whistle buoy and became this book.
Great. Well, was there something about the era of history, Prohibition years, that appealed to you for the setting of Leaving Lucy Pear?
It's funny. I think that I was initially drawn in a kind of naive way to the 1920s, as a lot of people are, as a sort of with the stereotypical idea of the glamorous, roaring 20s with, the parties and the flappers and the amazing music and art and kind of the way that people were starting to kind of break outside of certain Victorian social mores. But then I learned through my research, and as I wrote and I read and as I went, so much of sort of the underside of the 20s and the way in which it was a decade of incredible division and extreme politics in the United States. Post World War I, there was this kind of anti-communist hysteria going on, this real anti-immigrant vein running through the country, a lot of nativist rhetoric. The membership in the Ku Klux Klan that decade skyrocketed. I mean, there was a lot of very disturbing and hateful things going on in the country, and that both, fit with the story I was trying to tell, because it is there's a lot of class division. The woman who leaves the baby is a wealthy Jewish socialite, and the woman who raises the baby is a poor Irish Catholic mother of 9. And then there's also obviously division on an ethnic level and a racial level. I mean, both of them actually are ethnic in the sense of but one has sort of the Jews in the story have at least attempted to assimilate to the point of kind of erasing themselves as Jews, and as you see in the book that it doesn't work. But all of that, I think that the decade served, the politics of the decade wound up really fitting the book in that way. And then as I kind of went further, and I mean, what's happening right now during this election cycle is not something that was actually going on when I was writing the book. Although even then I was sort of seeing a lot of resonances with our politics today. But now it couldn't really feel more resonant.
Sure. So how much research did you do prior to writing the novel?
I tend not to research very much before I start to write, but I did a ton of research as I wrote, and that's usually how I work. So I allow the story to guide the research rather than the other way around, if that makes sense. But I did, do a tremendous amount of research, both in the traditional kind of looking at history texts, and also I find primary source documents to be incredibly helpful. Newspapers, advertisements, all of that. And the thing I really love most is talking to people who either lived through, I spoke with a guy who had the grandson of a bootlegger in Gloucester who remembered seeing the bottles being hidden in the caves in the quarry walls. And I spoke with a very old woman who since has passed away about her memories of sort of as being a kid barefoot and walking where all the granite shavings were from the quarries and what that felt like on her feet. And that kind of research I really love the most because it gives me the kind of sensory material that I think really makes for excellent fiction, and also because for me it's just the most fun.
Sure. So what was your writing journey prior to writing your debut novel, The Little Bride?
I had mostly written short stories and published short stories. Although, I guess it goes back further than that. And I don't know if you're interested, beyond that.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. I mean, I think I didn't really know. I had always been writing since I was a kid in one form or another. And, but I didn't have, as I know a lot of people do, a sense of like, well, I'm going to be a writer, or definitely not, I will be a novelist. I just it was something that I always kept doing. And I think when I was young, in high school and college, on a creative level, most of what I did was poetry. And I really didn't start writing what I thought of as, fiction until I graduated from college. And I had this real urge to try my hand at it. And I started taking my very first fiction workshop. I took it at Grub Street Writers in Boston, which is a really wonderful writing school. And that was their first year in existence. And now they've really expanded. But I also at that time after college began working as a radio journalist, and I worked in radio for 5 or 6 years, which was its own really specialized and kind of I just think amazing type of writing that demands something very different than really anything else, to write for an audience that's just hearing you. Here we are on a podcast. And so I really, I learned a lot from that about both about brevity and about working on a deadline and just kind of getting it out. And also, I think that gave me a lot of material on a story level too. I mean, I was traveling all around the country and talking with people I was covering environmental policy and politics in particular. So that was really amazing. And then I decided, I was at a point in my life where I felt like I was still unattached enough that I could go get an MFA. And so I decided that if I could get funding, I would do it. And I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop, and I had a really amazing experience out there, which really helped me kind of solidify my, kind of declare myself, I guess, as a writer. And while I was there, I started publishing my short stories. And, for a long time, short stories were really what I was writing and working to master in a way. I can't say that I have, and I don't know that I still think of it as the hardest form. But I've published a lot of them and I feel good about a bunch of them, but I still feel when I sit down to write a short story, like I'm starting all over at the beginning. And I always also felt in my short stories, the strain. I was always kind of fitting novels into them. So I think that the shift to novel writing for me felt like a very natural one, which isn't to say it was easy, but it did feel natural.
Sure. And so are you still writing short stories?
I am, but very occasionally and with a lot of agony. And so I'm not sure. I mean, I have, sort of an idea or two at a time. And then when I come to a breaking point in the novel where either I've given a draft to somebody or, I just have a place where I have some space, I make a go of it. And I was kind of working pretty hard at one this last winter for a while, and then kind of had to step away from it again. I haven't figured it out yet. So I do intend to keep writing them. I think it's just going to be a slower pace.
So are you working on another novel now?
I have begun another novel, which it's nascent enough that I can't talk much about it,
Sure.
to say that it's involves the Book of Esther, that and its writing in ancient Persia, and also 1970s feminism, and then also contemporary Brooklyn motherhood. So
Great.
how all of those things will come together, we will see. I'm excited.
That would be interesting. Yeah, I'm sure it'll be exciting. So what advice would you have for aspiring writers who might be listening and are interested in writing their own novels or short stories?
Oh, wow. I think, let's see, to put the writing first, I think would be my first piece of advice. And when I say that, what I mean is that I think, this is different than when I started writing. It's very different. There are so many outlets now for publishing one's work that I think it can be very easy to kind of follow an impulse of just kind of like, well, I might as well publish it since I can. And most of the time, that's just not true. And most people, I forget exactly the number of pages it was that Grace Paley said one should write before you even began to sort of even consider publishing any of it. But, I think that it just takes an enormous amount of practice if you want to do it seriously. And I think along with that, importantly, because it's not like I would advise anyone just go into a hole and be sort of by themselves writing for years and years before they decide to make, to take any of it out in the world, is that to find readers and to find a community, because I think that's, what keeps us all going and what makes it worth it. And so I think, taking a workshop if you can, or going to a conference, or just even finding a writing group in your community of people who they don't necessarily need to be writing the same thing as you at all in terms of genre, but people whose work you respect and who's, again, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to like it, but that you get what they're doing and want to offer them help. And because that's how you build experience and the kind of confidence that, to become sort of your own editor, so that by the time you're ready to go out and publish, you have more of a sense of where you're at with the project, and you have readers that you can count on to help you get there.
When you sit down to write, are there ever days that you need to do something to jumpstart the writing process for yourself?
Most of the time, I'm kind of good to go if I'm in the middle of a project, because I tend to try to stop the day before in a place where I know what I'm going to do the next day. This is not uncommon, the idea of sort of even stopping in the middle of a sentence, or stopping, certainly in the middle of something, so that you're not sitting down the next day and saying, okay, I have no idea what to do here. But when I do get stuck, I think that the thing that's most helpful for me, which sounds counterintuitive, is this little Post-it that I have, which says, "You will fail." Because it just reminds me that, for instance, like I just looked at, I've been doing this little narrative, this Instagram narrative of my writing process for Leaving Lucy Pear. I wrote, tens of drafts of this novel, and that's even after it was sort of like in pretty good shape. And so to remind myself of how little of what I'm writing is actually going to survive helps me just get on with it, because it's not gonna write itself, and I will fail anyway, so I might as well just do it.
So, are there books and authors that inspire your own writing, or books that you've read in the last year or two that really impressed you?
I just finished this really beautiful book by Dominic Smith called The Last Painting of Sarah DeVos, which I think came out earlier this year, maybe in the spring, and is a beautiful book about sort of a lost painting, and the woman who then, a woman who forged the painting later, and then kind of the comeuppance later. I mean, I'm not describing it very well, but it was a beautiful book that leapt between time periods in a serious way, and managed to kind of keep the thread together. And it's interesting. I guess the other book that comes to mind, even though there are many others that I could use in this answer, but just while I'm on the time leaping for kind of theme, is The Hours, which again is not a new book, as you know, but
Sure.
I've returned to that in large part because of the novel that I'm writing now. And it's another book that does that, makes those jumps between time, specifically 3 time periods, and manages to do it in a way that feels seamless. And as I'm kind of studying it now, whereas I read it, whenever it first came out, I'm really starting to see, even more. I'm even more impressed by the brilliance with which Cunningham wove those pieces together.
Sure. So where can people find you online if they're interested in learning more about you and your novel, Leaving Lucy Pear?
Oh, yeah. My website is just my name, www.annasolomon.com. My Solomon is spelled with all O's. That's really the only place one could get confused. And I'm on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and having fun out there, actually.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Anna Solomon, author of the new novel, Leaving Lucy Pear. The novel is available in bookstores now or as an ebook, so go grab a copy. And Anna, thanks for doing this interview.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
Great. So this will go up in a few days. I will send you an email or send an email to your publicist and let them know.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
Great.
I hope I was semi-articulate.
Oh, yeah, you were. Absolutely.
Okay. That was fun. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Almost 90% of women have cellulite. And guess what? It's not their fault. We don't choose cellulite, but we can choose a different way to treat it. Meet Quo, collagenase Clostridium histolyticum, AAES, the first and only FDA-approved prescription injectable for moderate to severe cellulite in the buttocks of adult women. This non-surgical treatment is injected by an aesthetic specialist in 10 minutes or less. Individual results may vary. Do not receive if you are allergic to any collagenase or ingredients in Quo, or have an infection at the treatment site. May cause serious side effects, allergic reactions including anaphylaxis, and injection site bruising. Seek medical help right away for any signs of allergic hypersensitivity. Tell your doctor about all your medical conditions if you have a bleeding condition or take medicine that prevents clotting. Most common side effects include bruising, pain, hardness, itching, redness, discoloration, swelling, and warmth at the injection site. Ask your doctor about all possible side effects and for product information. If you're ready to get to the bottom of your cellulite, learn more and find a specialist at Quo.com.